Good morning, Packers fans, and welcome back to another episode of Pancakes and Packers, your Packers morning show. And the day has arrived. It is draft day. I couldn't be more excited about the fact that we're actually going to get to talk about a new Packer, potentially, at the end of the day today. And we'll talk all about that, whatever happens in the first round in tomorrow morning's episode. But today, I want to hear from you guys and hear what your bold predictions are, or just outright predictions are for the Packers draft. And, if you're watching live, go ahead and put those in the chat. I'll run through them as we get along. But I also went through Twitter and grabbed a few off of some Packers fans there as well. And I'll share some of mine along the way. But before we do any of that, as we always do, we start with coffee. All right. And today's coffee is a tweet that I saw from Daniel Jeremiah, which isn't specific to the Packers, but will definitely have implications on what the Packers would potentially do at the top of the draft. And so his last 5 phone calls, he talked about everybody is moving up for an offensive tackle. So that's impactful for the Packers because obviously one of the likely positions the Packers would draft at the top of this draft is offensive tackle. It's a really good offensive tackle class. I mean, depending on how you view some of them, a lot of these guys have that versatility that they might actually be better as guards, but could still potentially play tackle. And if you look at it that way, that's more positions that the Packers would be interested in taking that are going to go off the board before them. So that might drive the Packers to be a little bit more aggressive in the first round and move up to get the guy that they want. Or if you're looking at it and you're thinking like, hey, DB is definitely our need there, whether it's Cooper DeJean, Kool-Aid McKinstry, or somebody else that would potentially fall like a Kenyan Mitchell or Terrion Arnold, that would have impacts on, who's available at pick 25. So at times before I've talked about how, as many as 7 or 8 tackles could go off the board before the Packers even get up to pick. It definitely sounds like that's a likelihood at this point. And you're looking at guys like, obviously Joe Alt was going to go before we were going to be up, most likely. You're looking at Olu Fashanu, JC Latham, Amarius Mims might even go, Troy Fautanu, Talisa Fuanga, a bunch of guys, offensive tackles could be also like Graham Barton, even though a lot of people think he's going to kick inside. So a lot of guys that could come off the board before the Packers are even up. So it's going to definitely have an impact on how that looks for us. But I mean, I think personally that DB is kind of the way that we're going to go in this first round. I think, traditionally the Packers have gone defense a lot in the first round, really since I think since 2010 or 2011, they've essentially had one offensive first round pick, and that's Jordan Love. And the one before that I think was Darren Sherrod. Forgot about Brian Bulaga in there. So there's been 2 in that time period. The one before that, and I think it was in 2010 or 2011, was Derek Sherrod. So not a lot of investment on the offensive side of the ball in the first round. And I think that's indicative of the fact that the Packers are likely going to go defense here. And the biggest position of need that has value in the first round is defensive back, not linebacker. There's potential at defensive interior, but I don't think we're going to go edge early. I don't think we're going to go after one of those interior defensive linemen. I think they like the room I think they like the room they have, but definitely something that they're going to address later on. And, with that, let's just go ahead and dive into some of these predictions that we have. So first off, I'm going to call out Ray Breen, who, big time follower of the channel here. And he actually shared his prediction that the first pick is going to either be, Cooper DeJean or Kool-Aid McKinstry. He thinks offensive line is a need, but the defensive back position is definitely a bigger need for them. So that's where he's thinking as far as how that goes. Let's see, what exactly did he say? He says it's either Cooper DeJean or Kool-Aid McKinstry. I'm assuming in the first, but something tells me the Packers would need to trade up for another Iowa defender, that being DeJean, obviously. He tested really well athletically at his individual pro day and can either play corner or safety. Uh, this would likely be a selection based on positional need rather than best player available. Um, but Goody has talked about how he wants to pair Xavier McKinney with a young safety, and the Packers have a hole in the starting lineup alongside their big money free agent signing. So definitely something that I think is a possibility. I think almost a likelihood, in my opinion. And I think that's a relatively shared opinion among some of the other takes that I was able to find out on Twitter as well. And so I'll start off here with um, Notions of Jacob on Twitter shared some of his draft predictions, a list of them. And I actually really liked this. I think a lot of these are very true. No receivers or tight ends. I could see potentially a receiver, but it's not a need at all. And I think they've got other gaps that they would like to address instead. So I would agree, no receivers, no tight ends, 3 or 4 offensive linemen. I personally think we're going to end up with 4 in this draft. Oh, all done? Yeah. Awesome. And I think, between whether you want to kick Tom inside to the interior or not, the interior has a depth need that they need to address. And then you also want to address that swing tackle position, which is definitely a need in today's NFL, especially with how often guys go down. I mean, we've seen a number of tackle injuries in Green Bay that have had serious late season impacts on the Packers over the last 4 or 5 years. So definitely something I think that they're going to prioritize. A day 3 running back pick, a defensive lineman in the first 3 rounds. I think those are sound. I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't, or if we left the draft without a running back, because I do think they really like what they have in Emmanuel Wilson. And I think there's still some need to add to that room, but I think they would be more willing to get a guy that would probably be more of a special teamer anyway, and take somebody out of like UDFAs rather than spend the draft capital on it. So either I think they're going to go earlier with a running back that's going to be a potential future starter for them, or they're just going to kind of avoid it and push it off to the side unless somebody falls right into their lap, really. Multiple safeties drafted. I think that's sound as well. I think you're going to see potentially in that somebody that could be a corner that projects to be a safety, like a DeJean or something along those lines. But generally, I think 2 or 3 defensive backs is what I would say, but multiple safeties for sure, and at least 2 trades up or down. I actually think along those lines, we're going to end up with 2 trades within the first 3 rounds. So I think potentially moving up in that first round, especially to be aggressive and go get the guy that we want, but then also maneuvering into some of those ranges where there's a little bit of a gap between some of the Packers picks, maybe between 58 and 88, for example, or maybe even pairing a couple of day 3 picks to move back into the end of the 3rd round potentially. So definitely like some of those predictions there from Jacob over at Notions of Jacob. The next one I want to talk about was Broadcast Scout. Shared his prediction that of the 11 picks, that they would consist of 4 offensive linemen, 2 defensive backs, 3 linebackers, 1 running back, and 1 tight end or fullback. And then caveats that if they decide that they like one of the pass rushers that has traits, that they would substitute that for that running back. Oh, that's a cool puppy, huh? That's awesome. Oh, you're giving the puppy cake. Yeah. That is awesome. So yeah, I mean, if I was going to look at this the same way myself, my prediction for this would be also 4 offensive linemen. I would go 3 defensive backs, 2 linebackers, and kind of invert that on there. one running back, and I'll caveat this that either I'm going to go running back or I'm going to go quarterback, which we'll talk about a little bit later with one of my predictions, and then an interior defensive lineman rather than a tight end or fullback. So interesting take from Broadcast Scout on some of those positions, especially the tight end or fullback spot. I don't think we need that. I think they like the young room that they have there, and I think that's what we'll roll with in 2024. But next up, we've got Mack on the Pack, who about a week ago had predicted that the Packers were going to go Amarius Mims with pick 25. And he's the one that I saw that kind of liked the stick and pick option here. And he changed it up from last week where I said he did Amarius Mims. He predicted Tyler Guyton. And I think of the bigger body tackles in this draft, Tyler Guyton is the guy the Packers would be more interested in. He's got all of the athletic testing, which Mims does not have. He doesn't have agilities. And then on top of that, he played a little bit more or started a little bit more for Oklahoma than Mims did for Georgia. So definitely a toolsy offensive tackle that, big body, powerful guy that the Packers could really be interested in at offensive tackle. But again, like Jeremiah talked about, a lot of people looking at moving up for tackles in this draft, and that might mean that guys like Tyler Guyton, Amarius Mims, Graham Barton, some of the tackles in that range, maybe even Kingsley Suamatea, end up rising up boards and either are off the board before the Packers pick or leave us with very slim options at pick 25 for tackle. The next one here, we look at some of the trade up options, and that's, LoveLoveBall here on Twitter predicted that we would trade up to 20 and pick Nate Wiggins. And I laugh a little bit at this because, one, I don't think Nate Wiggins is really on the Packers board early, at least because of his size. He's a great coverage corner, does not love to tackle, which is something that Hafley's talked about that he wants out of his defensive backs. And then on top of that, he's really light. Like, was light at the combine, but like only marginally heavier at his pro day. So I think he was in the 170s at the combine and won like 83 or something like that at his pro day. So I don't know that the Packers would really be in on Nate Wiggins that early in the draft. And I laugh at it, like I said, because in his bio, he says, "I know Packers ball." And if you know Packers ball, you're thinking of Packers threshold, which has become a little bit of a dirty word. But with the exception of Jair Alexander, who is even still like a stockier build at his height, like this just doesn't really fit. So I don't know that I agree with this prediction very much. Ian Kenyan, though, he predicted either they're going to pick at 25 and take Graham Barton, or there's going to be I didn't see this coming big trade up to within the top 15. And I've talked a little bit about who you might want to go up for in the top 15. And my guys that I would think there would be like Olu Fashanu, Quinyon Mitchell. Some people really like Terrion Arnold. He's probably in that range. I'm not as high on Terrion Arnold as others are. I definitely prefer Quinyon Mitchell in that spot, but those are some of the guys that I would consider moving up for. I don't think, unless Alt is falling, maybe Fuanga, but a lot of people like to think of him more as a right tackle only and a guy that's going to kick inside. I think if we're going to draft a tackle that high, they better be able to play left tackle. And there's even people that think, J.C. Latham might have a little bit of issues kicking from right tackle to left tackle. So those are a few of the guys that you might see didn't see coming kind of trade for. But I think getting into the top 15 is probably a little too rich for Goody's blood, unless there's truly like a blue chip player that he sees that's going to be in that spot. Next up, we've got Lambo GB, who I love this part. The very end here is that he's going to stay up till 7 a.m. wherever he is, living. I'm assuming that's somewhere in like the UK or Europe, but 7 a.m. to watch his team trade out of the first round. I think that's hilarious. So who he wants is Graham Barton. A lot of Packers fans love Graham Barton, love that versatility. Um, and really, I mean, he's a physical freak athlete at that position and has the right kind of character build that you want in, your offensive line room. Got a little bit of aggressiveness and some nasty to him, which is something that we haven't had a ton of on the Packers offensive line in a while. What he thinks will happen though, is that trade back and pick up an extra day 2 pick, which, I mean, depending on how the board falls, I definitely see some merit to doing that because, there is some really good depth in that, middle of the second to early third round range of guys that the Packers could really like that would be able to, add some more bodies to that room. But I don't think it's the prudent thing to do. I think, you know, there's an opportunity cost of trading back from 25, and you're going to potentially miss out on some of these other guys that are at a slightly higher level. I mean, it doesn't mean that they're, leaps and bounds ahead of the guys that are going to go in the middle of the second round, but it is something that, the higher up in the draft, typically there's, a little bit of a different risk profile of what you're going to get. So that means either they're more likely to hit or potentially their ceiling is higher at that position. So something to consider when you think about trading back. And with the number of picks the Packers have, I don't think trading back is the route that they would prefer to go. I think they would rather, if they were going to move and they see the board falling in a way that they aren't going to have somebody that they love at pick 25, I think they would rather be aggressive and go get the guy that they love than stay back, wait for something to fall to him. And if nothing falls, then trade back until something else falls to him. I think they're going to take a more aggressive rather than a passive approach to this year's draft. Packers update. First round draft prediction. Packers move back to pick 30 with Baltimore, pick up a third round pick, and they select Tyler Guyton. I mean, that'd be really good value for Guyton at 30. I also think that, he's a big body offensive tackle that the Ravens would potentially be interested in as well. So I don't know if he was coming up on the board that the Baltimore Ravens would want to trade out of that pick. But again, as we talked about earlier in the show, Daniel Jeremiah thinks that people are moving up for tackles in this draft. And I don't think it's just going to be like, hey, a bunch of people who moved up and there's like 4 or 5 tackles taken. I think that's going to mean that there's going to be an early run on tackles and we're going to be left, to pick up the scraps, so to speak, either at 25 or pick 41. So, definitely a guy that the Packers would be interested in targeting for sure, but I don't know if he'll make it all the way to pick 30. Well, that's all of the tweets that I saw out there as far as Packers predictions. I kind of talked a bit about some of mine along the way, but I think one of them that I really, really think, I think the first 4 picks are going to go in one of 2 ways. I think we're either going to start with an offensive lineman in the first round and then go defensive back next, then linebacker with pick 58, and then defensive lineman with pick 88, or it's going to start off with a defensive back, then go offensive line, then linebacker, then back to offensive line. I think 2 of the first 4 picks are going to be offensive linemen. Ideally, somebody that's going to be a preferred tackle, and then somebody that's going to be probably a tackle that the Packers would prefer to play guard, whether that's a Dominic Puny or a number of these guys that are kind of in that second round range. It could even be, potentially if he's there and they want to go that route, could be Barton in the first that they prefer to kick inside. But I think they're going to try to prioritize, those 2 needs really in the depth on the offensive line, and then potentially a starter at safety or just a versatile defensive back that can do a bit of safety and play some on the outside at corner or even in the slot at corner rather. And then they're going to attack that linebacker position, because I think the prime range for linebacker near the top of this draft is going to be around pick 58. Could that end up being more like pick 41 because of the, the dearth of talent at the top of this draft for linebackers? Absolutely. It could be that there's just not enough preferred starting linebacker caliber guys in this draft that teams feel they need to go get their guy earlier, so that way they can leapfrog teams and avoid coming out of this draft without somebody there. And that's a spot that, I mean, Packers fans are really keen on getting a linebacker, myself included, but the team might not be as panicked about the need at that spot. I do think they really like Edrin Cooper at linebacker. I also think they're going to like Cedric Gray, and so many people have talked about Trevin Wallace lately that he's become a preferred Packers pick among the Packers Twitter sphere. So definitely some interesting spots there. I think the Packers are also going to go, if they pick a quarterback, it's going to be in the 4th round. I think if Goody talked about getting back to the philosophy of taking quarterback every year, which I absolutely love. But it's one of those things too where we were pretty solid with Sean Clifford. I mean, granted, he hasn't played in any actual live regular season game action, but he went out there in the preseason and put on a pretty good show last year, and he's got a lot of experience coming out of Penn State where he played a lot of ball there. And I mean, unseated Will Levis as the starter at Penn State that forced Levis to transfer to Kentucky. And it's definitely, I think if you're going to take a quarterback and you're going to do it for the value of having that quarterback, if they're going to even potentially compete to outseat Sean Clifford as number 2, it's going to have to be earlier than later, because you're not going to get a guy in the 5th, 6th, 7th round of this draft that is going to be at the level of Sean Clifford and then push him for that number 2 job. At that point, you're just taking a third quarterback that's going to ride on your practice squad for a couple of years. And, maybe he ends up developing over that time. But I think you would want to take somebody that can actually compete, at least at this point in Sean Clifford's career. Maybe a year or 2 down the line, you take somebody that you think could develop into that. And then you see that Clifford is also developing, and maybe you're able to push him to a team that's quarterback needy that he could potentially start for. And you could recoup some value in that pick there. But I think this year, if we're going to go quarterback, it's going to be in the 4th round. And that really means potentially looking at like a Michael Pratt kind of or like I said earlier this week in the first Pancakes and Packers episode, what I think the Packers would want to do in a quarterback selection is take somebody with a high ceiling. Could be a little bit of a project, but I think they want somebody that's got a higher ceiling. If you're going to take another guy that is steady and reliable, like a Keaton Slovis, for example, you're basically taking another Sean Clifford. And I mean, what's the point at that point? So that's no shade at Sean Clifford either. I really think he's going to be a quality backup quarterback in the NFL, but we don't need 2 of the same caliber backup quarterback on that roster. I think you want somebody that's going to potentially, exceed what that ceiling is for Sean Clifford. And then, yeah, I think that's mostly it between all of the ones that we pulled off of Twitter, the few of them that we got some messages on. I think that's what we're going to look at on this, this episode of the Pancakes and Packers podcast, where we looked at some of these draft predictions. I still want to hear what you guys have as far as predictions for the Packers draft. So go ahead and still leave comments about this. I'd love to get into the chat and talk to you guys about it. And, we're just, 12 and a half hours away from, the draft starting, and let's do it. So we'll be back tomorrow to talk about whatever the Packers did in round 1 and day 1 of the draft. And then we'll look at who is available on the board for the Packers going into day 2. But thank you for tuning in, and go Pack, go.